Good morning, and thank you for coming by. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about these collections. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming by. And let's talk about our North Country Boats and Boating and Paul Jamison collections. And part of why I chose the North Country Boats and Boating collection, which is the first collection I'd like to discuss this morning, is that it has a lot of connection to St. Lawrence. My predecessor, Mark McMurray, selected the collection because he felt that it had a real, didn't select the collection. He began developing the collection because he felt that it had a real area-wide roots. Canoeing is culturally and economically, and even, shall we say, aesthetically, a real part of northern New York, the North Country, the Adirondacks. And he felt we really needed a collection that bespoke this fact. Also, there is a real connection between St. Lawrence and canoeing. This you see on the screen is Punky. It is a Rushton canoe that is here on display in the O&D Young Library. We also have a Rushton canoe on display in the Augsbury Field House that was the property of Dorothy Cleveland Salisbury, who, amongst other things, was a librarian for St. Lawrence in the early 20th century. Punky here is on display in ODY and is actually an Ugo, you can see a page from one of the Rushton catalogs with the specifications for this particular canoe. And so we have a real connection to canoeing here at St. Lawrence. And in fact, this is a shot of me and my younger son, Gillen, some years ago, participating in a Rushton relay race. And the canoe we're in was built by St. Lawrence University students. It was actually a course I taught on the history of canoes. And as part of the course, the students built a canoe, and some years later, my younger son and I took it out. And as I say, here we are in action at a Rushton relay. So when we speak about this North Country Boats and Boating collection, it's not only a collection we built because of the connection to the area, it's a connection we built really because of the connections to St. Lawrence. So these are the two collections, North Country Boats and Boating, Manuscript Collection 167. I won't read the bullet points, but you can see what is the material that makes up the collection. It is eclectic in terms of what you'll find in it, and then the Paul and Ruth Jameson papers, which I'll be talking about later in the hour, which is more of a traditional collection of documents. It is a very important collection for us, and I'll be outlining that again later in the hour. Okay, now showing you some items from the North Country Boats and Boating collection. We have sail and paddle from the late 19th century. And you'll notice this is J.H. Rushton of Canton asking, "Do you want anything of me?" This was a front page ad in Sail and Paddle from June 1891. Of course, when you talk about boats and boating in the North Country, particularly if you're talking about boats and boating in the North Country while seated in Canton, New York, you have to talk about Rushton, or at least allude to Rushton. And here we have, in this case, a very interesting advertisement that was front page from the company on the cover of Sail and Paddle. You'll also note at the bottom, they've got a showroom in New York City on Broadway, which was to me kind of an interesting revelation. I didn't realize that until I encountered Sail and Paddle. The other interesting thing about this particular journal is most of the editions have an advertisement for the St. Lawrence River Skiff, Canoe, and Steam Launch Company in Clayton on the back cover. And this is one of the advertisements. a marvelous late 19th century advert for the company, emphasizing what they made and that you don't want to accept the cheap, you don't want to accept the cheap knockoffs, you want to accept the famous St. Lawrence River skiffs. But of interest, and of interest to me, is it's a company other than Rushton. Here is another company that was in business at that point in time, and we get a sense of what their wares were. We do have some Rushton materials. Of course, a number of other folks have much bigger and more, have collections that really bespeak the breadth of Rushton's accomplishments and Rushton's craft than we do. I know Ivy is out there, and I'm pointing at you, Ivy. But we do have some Rushton pieces that I thought I'd bring out. Of particular interest to me is that wonderful Indian girl canoe envelope, the bright red envelope, which would be 1910 is the postmark, which I think is a really kind of snazzy little piece. We do have some Rushton correspondence. It's mostly him trying to collect bills, but I would want to put forward at least a little bit of the Rushton material that we have. One of the Rushton legacy materials that we have that I think is very interesting is we have a number of the programs from the Rushton canoe races, the regattas. This is the earliest one we have, which would be 1968, I believe. Notice it has Dwight Church and David Church, I guess his grandson, on the cover. These would be marvelous things to bring a group in or have a group work with, because not only do several of them feature very well-written pieces about the Rushton canoe business and about Rushton himself. One of them, for example, has a piece on Rushton by Atwood Manley, but they give you a lot of information about Canton, who is advertising in them, who is participating in the races. We can see in this particular edition, the 67, 66 winners are all profiled. Maybe there's a name there that you recognize, with nice pictures of the folks navigating the river. So we don't have a complete run. We have a run from the late 60s into the 70s, but what we do have forms a very interesting portrait of the canoe community and of the community from that period and in that point in time. Another part of this collection is we do have some materials from other boating companies that were in the region. A real highlight is this Spalding St. Lawrence Boat Company catalog, which, as you can see, has this absolutely wonderful cover. And this is a page from the catalog. I hope it is, I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger for you. You get a sense of what the catalog looked like. And interesting in the catalog is, you get very often with the particular boat, the plans for the boat, and a little bit of description of the boat itself. Give you just a moment to read through that, because it's a well-written period piece, I guess you would say. And a boat for anglers, especially when necessary for fishermen to stand up to cast or throw fly. The angler in the duck shot will appreciate such steadiness in a skiff, and the lovely little illustration. We do, I hopefully have a line on another catalog that we're going to bring in and make part of the collection. And we do have the bankruptcy proceedings for the company in carbon copy. So they, they did not go on indefinitely. Neither, of course, did Rushton. But it is a nice piece. And as I say, I'm hopeful that we'll be bringing another catalog in. And I am certainly on the lookout for any Spalding St. Lawrence skiff catalogs that might float down the river by me. We also have a few things from the Lier, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Boatworks, which you can see, this is dated 1909. and is actually an invoice, or I guess a record of some sundry expenses. But it does show us that they were in business in 1909. And this is a photograph of the Boatworks. I don't know specifically where it was. And unfortunately, this particular picture is undated. So I don't have a date for it. Thus, for example, I can't confirm that the business was still operational when this photograph was taken, but it gives us a sense of what the Boatworks looked like. And again, is further proof that this was a viable business, at least at some point in time in Ogdensburg. And in that way fills into the quilt, to mix metaphors, that the collection tries to produce, a real sense of what was available in terms of the economics of boating and boat production in the North Country, that there were these companies who seemed to have a hard scrabble time of it, but nonetheless they existed and they were producing vessels for the public. Okay, this is a fun little piece. We do have a number of things in the catalog, in the collection that do reference canoe companies not from the North Country. We have a snazzy 1960s catalog from the Old Town Canoe Company. We have a catalog from a company in Wisconsin. And then we have this wonderful little piece from the Naphtha Launch Company. It is in the shape of a seashell. One of the illustrations of the launch there you can see on the cover. And when you open it up, you get a description of their product inside, rather than a pearl inside the shell. You get a description of the product. And then, as you can see off to the right, testimonials to the boats and what wonderful products they are, ranging folks from Baltimore to New Orleans to Iowa to Chicago. But this is a lovely and fun little piece and is a nice kind of side excursion within the collection. These catalogs from companies not in the North Country, but part of the greater boating and community of boaters in the United States. We also have some ephemeral pieces in the collection. This is a map of canoe routes from the state of New York in 1929 and published by the Division of Forest Lands, which presumably became the Department of Natural Resources. If you see down toward the bottom, the canoe routes are the canoe routes are in black. And if you look down toward the bottom of the map, lower right hand, we see the long lake, and you can see a route that goes all the way toward Old Forge, but marked both with the carries and with the area of the canoe, with the area of navigable waters that you can actually use. If you look up just above that, below the broken game admonition, you can see Tupper Lake and the suggested route along the lakes there, which connects to at least one other route. So this is an interesting and fun little piece. We have a North Country maps collection, though most of that is not about canoeing. This is one of the pieces we have specifically about canoeing, though you may be interested to learn that we do have a substantial and interesting collection of maps about the North Country. Okay, another part of this particular collection, the last component of this collection I'm going to speak to this morning, is our book collection. We have a substantial collection of books about canoeing. And this constitutes a part of our overall North Country canoe and canoeing collection. These are shelved with our rare book titles. And back in 2019, Katie Palmer, who was a student here at St. Lawrence, did a summer research fellowship, and she wrote a descriptive biography of our canoe book collection. And here we have one of the entries, and of course, I know there are a couple librarians out there in the crowd, and you would know what a descriptive bibliography is. But here is Katie's entry for our oldest book within that collection. And you can see she, in proper bibliographic form, gives you the title page. You notice on the collation, she has given the dimensions of the book and the gatherings. A through D, there are those many, A through D are all gatherings of 8 leaves. E is a gathering of 6 leaves. F is a gathering of 9 leaves, for a total of 48 leaves. There are the illustration contents, all of the illustrations available in the book. So very much using the traditional form of bibliography, Katie went through and described 44, I believe it was, unique titles in our book component to our North Country Boats and Boating collection. And here actually is the book that Katie is describing, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, is the oldest title that we've designated within this particular collection. And this is another example from the collection. This is Adrian Nelson's Practical Boat Building for Amateurs, 2nd edition from London. We have a number of British books in this particular collection. And like many of the books, and like the Spalding St. Lawrence Canoe Catalog, this gives plans. You can get in and see plans for both building the boat and for in this case, creating a paddle, which leads to my outreach exercise. So I'm going to demonstrate, whoops, I think I missed a word there, can learn something from a 19th or 20th century canoe book. In particular, can you learn to read canoe construction plans from these books? So I'm going to go forward and bring this up. What I'd like everyone to do is read the article, A Simple Little Canoe. A Simple Little Canoe. I'm going to make that big, and you should have a JPEG of that. And then we're going to talk about it, or I'm going to have you answer some questions about it. So I'm going to bring this up and make it big so it can be seen. Let's take a few minutes to read A Simple Little Canoe. Starts there with the picture and goes over to the next article, which is called A Foot and Hand Steering. Okay, has everyone had a chance to read this? Yes, no? Okay, but those folks I can see are nodding, so we'll say yes, you've had a chance to read it. So here are your questions. So here are 2 questions to answer, or at least evaluate for their usefulness. And they are, all righty, let's unmute and talk. What are the advantages of a simple little canoe? Ivy.
Well, it sounds like you can take it on the train with you.
You can take it on the train, right?
Pretty handy.
Pretty handy. Some other folks. I don't want to have to call on people.
Even a frail girl can pick it up,
Yes.
can bring it in and out of the water. I thought that was interesting.
Yes, I did too, Anthony. We'll talk about that a little more in a moment. But even a frail girl or a 59-year-old librarian can take it out of the water. Somebody else. How does the seat work?
Brian writes that it folds down.
Yes. And notice it's an old style seat. And actually, moving one slide ahead to Anthony's point, here's the bonus question. I think I may have the wrong paragraph for where this is, but what can a frail girl do? What does the phrase frail girl tell us about what the author assumes? So this is a quest, this piece in its way also does invite a discussion of gender in late 19th century, right? What are the author's assumptions, writing for a general but probably educated audience? And it is something you can talk about. Now you'll notice on the handout, Well, one of the things about this article is it does involve the technical aspects of the canoe, right? We're actually reading about the technical aspects of the canoe. And what I got to thinking about in terms of outreach, if you look at my "What Can You Learn from a Pile of Plain Looking Canoe Books," is that these titles all have canoe plans, and that you could get, for example, Megan, students into these to talk about how do you read these plans, which are going to demonstrate that there's actually something you can learn from these books, even though they are, 1931, 1893, 1889, but it gives you something to actually work through in a kind of time efficient manner, because you can figure these plans out. And in that way, working with a group of students or a group of individuals, open the book, have these plans and a real discussion point to talk about what does the book intend and what is the book trying to do and how does the book get you to visualize canoes. As well as that point is you can actually learn something out of an old book. I don't know, what do folks think? Am I paddling up the wrong river? Or does this hold water? I can go on with these awful puns for hours.
One other thing I thought about reading this is just the way advertising has changed so much
Yes.
in this time, because it's like if you're trying to sell somebody a canoe now, you're going to use as few words as possible to get an idea of the canoe across. You're not going to go into like 8 paragraphs of specifics.
Right, right.
Time for that.
But of course, what we get in those 8 paragraphs is a real sense of the boat itself. But yes, an excellent point, Ivy. I mean, it says something about attention spans then and now. The other thing about this particular exercise, because one of the limitations is most of the stuff we have is not going to leave the room, right? We keep it here for the reasons I don't need to explain. But in this case, this is stuff I could go on the road with, right? I mean, these are not our most, at the risk of sounding a little snobbish here, these are not our Janus Press editions. These are not some of our better books. One of them, the How to Build Canoes, is an actually beautiful book, and it's a little fragile, but I would be confident that people could be supervised to take care of the books. And if a little something happened to it, it's not the end of the world. So this is something that I could go out and actually do somewhere outside of the confines of the O&D Young Library. And it would sort of engage people with this particular collection that I think has both regional interest and some real intellectual meat to boot. Any other comments on this particular exercise?
I would definitely use this to talk about, at least with students, if I were doing this, I would definitely use it to talk about the gender language in here.
Yes.
And like somebody brought up before, I think talking about advertising and how that has changed would be really interesting with students.
And along with the Sail and Paddle, all of these books have advertising. So, these were mass market books, inexpensive books produced for British or American audiences, and they all have advertising. So that would work. Anyone else?
It would be kind of cool too for someone or a student to read this article and then like come up with their own like modern day like ad. Like what would the students today?
Yes. Yeah, right. Wow.
Yeah, that would be kind of fun.
Effectively translate it to our time. Yeah,
right,
wow.
Right.
That's a great idea, Christy. All righty, let's talk a little about Paul Jameson. I'll sort of go by way of introducing him. This, to my way of thinking, is one of our most important collections. Paul Jameson has real connections to St. Lawrence. He was on the English faculty for many years. And of course, if you know the story of Adirondack conservation, Paul Jameson has a very important local legacy, and all of this is reflected in his papers. And just by way of, actually, I've got to make this a little bigger. So I'm going to go back behind my screen here and just sort of make this a little bigger, but you can see this is his bibliography. or most of his, well, this is his bibliography of his major works. We'll get to another, get to his shorter works at another outreach exercise. But you can see here, these are some of his major writings. Some of them may be very familiar to you, things like the Adirondack Reader or Uneven Ground. Harrison's Yellow, which is a later book, was published by the Caliban Press. That is a fine press that my predecessor, Mark McMurray, ran here in Canton for many years. He now runs it in Cranberry Lake. And it's a beautiful book about a rose bush. So Harrison's Yellow is a kind of rose. This is, I think, a run of 45 books that was hand printed. This is the one we have here in the collection that's signed. You can see the beautiful paper that was made, handmade paper for the cover. But it's a fun little thing that is a nice part of our not only fine press collection, but our Jameson collection. Okay, and what is the Jamison collection comprised of? It's a significant collection, takes 20 boxes, and it's pretty much everything. We have his correspondence, the manuscripts of all of his major books and associated materials by that correspondence with editors, some people writing to him, other concerns he had about the publication. We have many of his articles, essays, and book reviews, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but in some cases, he saved out letters he got from readers in response to a piece, photographs, scrapbooks, stuff about St. Lawrence. We have materials related to all of these organizations. So if someone is doing research on the Adirondack Conservancy, we have material in the Jamison collection that is really going to be of interest to that individual. So a lot of the, Jamison touched a lot of the organizations that were in the Adirondacks, that were active in the conservation, various conservation movements associated with the Adirondacks. And his contributions to those are well documented in the collection. We have Ruth Jamison's papers too, which are very interesting in their own right. We recently made two significant additions to the collections. Christine Jerome, who is the author of the book, An Adirondack Passage, in which she recreates one of Nessmuck's canoe voyages, had a long correspondence with Paul Jameson, and she donated her share of that correspondence to us just last summer. So we added that to the collection. And these letters are very interesting, not only insofar as they both discuss their work, Jamison's writings and Christine Jerome discussing her writing, An Adirondack Passage, which is an absolutely beautiful little book, and a book I used in one of the courses I did here on canoes. You really get a sense of Jamison as a literary figure. He was on the English faculty here. He was extremely well read in American literature, and his tastes as a reader and how those tastes as a reader manifest in him as a writer becomes clear in the correspondence. And then just this fall, Tom Kligerman donated his letters between himself and Paul Jameson to us. I got a chance to meet Mr. Kligerman, and he was very involved in the lawsuits that were critical to opening the Adirondack waterways. In fact, this is from a press release from the New York State Attorney General's office, which you can find actually on their online archive. And you can see Mr. Kligerman is one of the people sued by the Adirondack League Club when they canoed down the south branch of the Moose River. And this particular case became a landmark case in public access to Adirondack waterways, to navigable Adirondack waterways. So Mr. Kligerman's letters get into really the nuts and bolts of the lawsuits. So these were a very welcome and a very important contribution to the collection. And as I say, a contribution that came just this, not even this summer, I'm sorry, came this fall, came back in September. I met Mr. Kligerman at Parents Weekend here. And that's where we got the contribution. So this collection has had several nice additions just in the last little while. And this is what I was mentioning a moment ago, public right of navigation. And this is one of Paul Jameson's most important legacies, which is the ability of people to get out on waterways, which actually I'm not a legal scholar and can't really speak to the precedents that the cases were eventually decided upon. But these go back to the laws of the state of New York from the very founding of the state of New York. And this is what Jameson and Kligerman and the many other individuals involved were working toward, the public right to navigation. And this comes from a pamphlet that was published by Paul Jameson, I believe, with that Citizens for the Adirondack group. Okay, now, so that's a little overview of the collection. And it is a collection that, as I mentioned earlier, is a very traditional set of someone's papers. It is their documents, the papers. Within this collection, we have, as I mentioned, his magazine writings, and we have materials that appeared in the Adirondack, the publication of the Adirondack Mountain Club, many of them going back to the 50s and 60s. Now, this is another outreach exercise that I came up with, and I'm interested in getting feedback from the group on. This would have to be something done here in the library. We would not really be able to let Jameson materials leave the building. But one of the challenges that I've discovered, I've been here at St. Lawrence for 23 years, but I've only been in the role of special collections librarian for 3 years. And this for me is very much a late middle-aged reinvention. And one of the things that I've been struggling with is how do you work with students in terms of teaching them archival research, particularly when archival research is often very time-consuming. And isn't something that you can do quickly in a hour session usually, and isn't something that always works out. A big part of researching an archive, as I'm sure everybody in the room knows, is sometimes you paddle up the wrong river. Sometimes you paddle up the wrong river for quite some time and don't find what you want. But I came up with an idea of having students or a group of individuals come in and look at some of his early writing. And in some respects, this isn't necessarily early. Mr. Jamison was actually probably middle-aged by the time these pieces were published. But these are things well before he became involved in some of the political activism, some of the real conservation work that he got involved with, the litigation. But they speak to his being out in the Adirondacks. Excuse me. And they also give a demonstration of him as a nature writer. And there really is actually some very engaging writing about being out in the Adirondacks themselves, hiking, canoeing. And the nice thing about all of these is that they're short. They're shorter pieces, a couple of pages. They're certainly complete pieces. And what they write about, they present about completely. But there's something that that individuals could read through in a shorter period of time, and then have discussion questions like this. Using the short pieces Paul Jameson published in Adirondack in the 50s and 60s, play the editor. You're putting together a book titled Paul Jameson, Portrait of an Adirondack Artist as a Young Man. Look at the pieces with an editor's eye. And ask these questions. And by doing that, perhaps give the group that's participating in this exercise a little experience of going in, looking at primary source material, and then drawing their own conclusions. So you'd have these questions and work with the group in this way to A, get a sense of who Paul Jameson was, B, get a sense of working with archival materials, but working in them in a way that you don't have to dedicate an entire day to doing it. This could be an outreach exercise with the group. And then finally, C, if anybody really happened to get interested, what about the young Paul Jameson do you learn that maybe translates to his later writings, right? These are all ahead of the books about the Adirondacks he would eventually publish. And that, by the way, is a photograph of Paul Jameson from 1941, taken from one of our yearbooks. So again, if you don't mind unmuting, we can't sort of run the exercise insofar as you haven't read these pieces. But I don't know, does this make any sense? One final thing I'd add is, this magazine, this Adirondack, is widely held in the region. A lot of libraries have it. Ivy, I think you've got it, for example. You could run this at your place, right? I mean, you could have a group come in and look at these. So, or we could have a group come in here, use the room and sort of run through this. But again, this speaks to, and I did talk this particular exercise over with a member of the faculty here. How do you teach archival research in a limited amount of time? Because archival research, like 18th century, 19th century advertisements, kind of goes against the grain, right? You don't do it quickly. But is this, am I paddling up the right river in terms of trying to formulate something that is both compact, but still actually speaks to doing research in an archive? I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
I think this is a good approach because when you're doing archival research, even if you are focused on something, you have to kind of let other things come into your, view. So
right.
I think this is good to be, sort of focused on a person, but then these questions are really open-ended so that it's like, let the materials speak to you how they will. Like you're going to tease something out of here of interest. And that can maybe hopefully sort of teach the mindset that you might need to have if you're going to start just digging around in some archives. You can't be, it doesn't always help to be really goal oriented. You have to be kind of minded. So I think this kind of gets at that in a way that, is condensed, which is good.
Right, because the pieces are short. So that idea would be, you can get in, read it fairly quickly, and then what are you seeing? Right. So thank you. That's very helpful.
I also really enjoyed when you were talking about connecting it out sort of to his later works. And I think that kind of incorporating sort of that bringing what you're learning from reading these archival materials out and making connections kind of into our work, into his later work, or even into like subject matter in a class, I think is a great way to kind of show how archives and primary sources can be used to sort of strengthen research and to sort of add another dimension that you yourself are going in there and having an opinion about, as opposed to just kind of reading other people's ideas about it. So yeah, I think that idea of kind of connecting it is a really great way to kind of show people how they can use archives to kind of strengthen, their papers or whatever, what have you.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Yeah, I mean, that's a message I give all the time, right? I mean, see for yourself, come into the archives, that's what you're doing. And certainly faculty those of them who use the facility look to us to really be a source to talk about primary research. I'd be certainly welcome hearing from someone else right now. Also, this is my contact information. Per Christie's request, our policies are we are open to the public. O&D Young Library is open to the public. Actually, if you live in St. Lawrence County, you could come in and get a library card for free, as a matter of fact. But the special collections are open to the public, and both of the collections I talked about today are things that you could come in and get. There's my phone and my email. You could certainly be in touch with me with any questions you might have, and with any feedback that if you think of something that for example, about the Jameson that you just saw and you'd like to share with me, I would love to hear from you. So there's my email. Like most of us who work at St. Lawrence, I can't seem to get out of it. So I'm in it a lot. You can call me at that number. Our hours are 8:30 to 11:30 and 1 to 4:30 that we're open for walk-in traffic. We're open by appointment. And at some point in time, if you were coordinating with a group that you wanted to come in and use, for example, the Jamison collection, There are options for weekend or evening visits if you're in touch with me, mostly because I live a grand total of 2 blocks from the library. So getting here is not a difficulty for me. And I know there are our business hours sometimes create an obstacle. So if you wanted to set something up for a group, I would be available with advanced notice to be here on times outside of our usual posted hours, on the weekends or on an evening.
Great. Thank you, Paul. This is really informative. And I loved the lessons were just perfect for
Well, thank you,
really
Christine.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for being our first program for this series. And I did neglect to read out the mission of the No Coast Showcase series is that, you know, we're trying to bring attention and awareness to unique cultural heritage collections across the North Country. So if you have a collection that you would like to do a presentation on, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But thank you, Paul, and we'll
My
be sure to.
pleasure. Well, thanks, everyone. I do appreciate you coming by. It was a lot of fun for me to get into these collections and get them out onto the water. Again, I'm striving for a bad pun, but it was a lot of fun for me to prepare for the day. So thanks very much, Christy, for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And maybe there's another one out there that you'd like to present on in the future too. Okay, well, have a great Friday, a great weekend, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you all next time.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.